Hi everybody, I'm Aaron and I am white. I grew up in predominantly white neighborhoods. The classrooms at school had mostly white kids in it, with maybe one or two black kids and a few other non-white kids, but mostly white. This was my entire education, from public elementary school, middle school, high school here in Portland, all the way up to going to a private university up in Seattle. My parents are white. As I grew up going to church, almost everybody at church was white. I thought it was normal to be white, and I realize now how far that is from the truth. I understand now that just because of the fact that I am white in a white supremacist society, I am racist. My parents taught me to be kind and loving to others no matter what they look like. And for the most part, I think I've done a good job being a nice person. But a quote that just keeps convicting me is Angela Davis. Her quote, "In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist." So the purpose of this video is to share with white people 10 things that I'm telling myself. 10 ways that I'm working to be more anti-racist. I feel convicted to speak up and tell my story of how I'm starting to learn and understand my white privilege and what systemic racism is. I want to encourage white people, especially white men, to also stand up and do something. Black people, indigenous people, and other people of color are hurting, and many white people are ignoring the hurt. I think it's as simple as that. Many of you watching this likely believe very strongly in whatever your viewpoint is. However, what I think so many of us are missing, and that's myself included, is that we are not putting ourselves into the shoes of other people. We are missing empathy. I've been learning a lot about empathy over the past few years. Empathy is feeling with people. Empathy is really vulnerable. It's a vulnerable choice because in order to connect with someone else and feel with them and their pain, what I have to do is I have to connect with something inside myself that feels that feeling too. When I hear everyone debating this point of view and arguing that point of view, I'm not hearing a whole lot of empathy. I think that's probably why so many white men have problems empathizing with other people, because our culture expects that real men aren't in touch with their feelings, or anybody else's feelings for that matter. And this is so wrong. Empathy is essential to truly loving our neighbors. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a husband to a white wife, and we have 3 white kids. We've also been foster parents for a few years now, and a couple of our foster placements have been white, while a few of them have been kids of color. And that exposure has helped us to begin to learn about how life is different for non-white families. I'm also a teacher here in Portland. For about 7 years, I taught 5th grade at a private school with predominantly white students. But I now teach 6th grade at a Title I public middle school with a much more diverse population of students. I love all my students, past and present, no matter what they look like. But now at my current school, since having exposure to so many different types of families, income levels, beliefs, cultures, identities, and especially different races and colors of skin, my perspective has been changing. And I think it started when I had several black students call me out for being racist. In the middle of the class, they called me racist for how I was managing the classroom. I honestly have felt like I am very fair in how I treat all my students. And I won't get into the specifics of what happened. At first, when they said that though, I felt shocked because I thought that I was working hard to be fair. So I just shook my head and I assumed that they were just unhappy and called me racist because they thought I was being unfair. and they didn't want a consequence. But as the days and weeks passed, I thought about it more and more, and as I reflected on what happened, I thought maybe I was not seeing the entire picture. Maybe I was missing something. Maybe I was doing something unfair that I didn't realize I was doing. Maybe I was being racist somehow, but I didn't understand how. So I talked to a few of my coworkers, and most of them are white too, and one of them recommended the book White Fragility, and I read it and it was eye-opening. And then the same week that I finished reading this book, the news about Ahmaud Arbery's murder popped up in my news feed. I read about it, I learned about how he was a black man out for a run in his neighborhood, and he was murdered by white men who followed him in a truck with guns. And this is what hit me like a ton of bricks. This is the white privilege that I never took personally until now. I love to go out for runs in my neighborhood. I love my neighborhood. I have the privilege to run in my neighborhood without even thinking about looking over my shoulder, wondering if a truck is coming up behind me with guys with guns ready to kill me. These kinds of thoughts have never entered my mind until now. I hear so many black people talking about driving in their cars and being pulled over for no reason. I've never thought that a police officer would ever pull me over unless I was clearly breaking the law. So I'm finally connecting the dots because I'm putting myself in other people's shoes. I'm realizing now what systemic racism is. I'm realizing now the white privilege that I've had my entire life without even realizing it. I'm ashamed of my past, and I'm sorry for my part in white supremacy. So at that point I felt a desire to read more, to learn more about something that I've been ignorant about. So the second book that I read after White Fragility was Me and White Supremacy. And in this book, the readers are encouraged to do the work of journaling at the end of each chapter. So I journaled each day and began to deepen my understanding of my white privilege, my white silence, my tone policing, and especially my white exceptionalism. These are all terms that I didn't know much about. White exceptionalism is when a white person thinks that they are one of the good ones because they don't do blatantly racist things. They try to be kind to everyone equally. They are nice to everyone. And reading this hit me hard because that's what I learned as I grew up. I was taught to love your neighbor without being taught about the unfair system. I was taught to love others the way I wanted to be treated. But when I am a white male, I look at love through my own eyes rather than the eyes of others. But now I see that love your neighbor means to listen to others, to feel with them, and to stand up for them. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. I've grown up thinking that I'm always right. Like maybe that's just something I struggle with, me being a Mr. Know-it-all, trying to prove everyone else wrong. This has caused conflict in my relationships, especially my marriage. I have a hard time accepting when other people think that I'm wrong about what I believe. Then again, the more I think about it, maybe it's not just me. Maybe it's a white privilege thing. Maybe it's because I'm a white man. The most recent book that I finished reading was So You Want to Talk About Race. Toward the end of the book, the author wrote, "If you are white in a white supremacist society, you are racist. If you are male in a patriarchy, you are sexist. If you are able-bodied, you are ableist. If you are anything above poverty in a capitalist society, you are classist. You can sometimes be all of these things at once. I am now realizing the full extent of my privilege. I am a man. I am white. I am in the middle class. I am able-bodied. I'm heterosexual. I'm cisgender. And I'm a Christian. I'm all these things. But as a Christian, I don't believe that God loves a man more than a woman. I don't believe that God loves a white person more than a black person, or the rich more than the poor, or able-bodied more than disabled, or heterosexual more than LGBTQ, or Christians more than anybody else with other beliefs in this world. God loves everybody. I believe that God doesn't value any group more than another. So why would I support a system that does? Why wouldn't I stand up for those with less power than the majority? The power has been in the hands of white people, and our culture has reflected that. I'm realizing that it's about who has the power. I think I'm finally learning. Right now, I feel as if I've been a clueless child or a teenager who thinks he understands everything about the world. But I'm just now realizing how big the world really is. So this is all the backstory of what I'm doing with this video. Right now I'm publicly committing to practice anti-racism work. If I'm doing something that doesn't further an anti-racist worldview, please call me out on it. That goes for my students, my coworkers, friends, and especially my family. I've already started this conversation with people who are close to me. This video is just an announcement publicly on my platform as a YouTuber, but the hard work really begins off camera. I'm getting outside my comfort zone. I think that's a really hard thing for white people to do. I have some friends who are people of color and they are not comfortable in this country, not like most white people are. If I truly believe that all people are equal and should be treated fairly, then I'm going to act on that belief and get out of my comfort zone to experience at least a tiny bit of discomfort. Many people experience discomfort, pain, fear, anger, and heartache on a regular basis just because of the color of their skin. So as a white man with white privilege, I encourage other white people to do the same, to do what is right, to stand up for your neighbor, to be the good Samaritan, especially white educators and especially white men. It's going to be messy and awkward and uncomfortable. For me, as a recovering perfectionist, doing this work and making this video is scary and daunting, but I believe it's worth it. It's worth it to get up off my ass to say something, to learn, to educate myself, and to teach empathy. Okay, so here are 10 ways that I am starting the work of being anti-racist. Number 1, listen more. Sit in the pain. Lament with the people around you. Do you have people of color around you or in your life? Then listen humbly to them if you do. If you don't, then seek out stories of others and listen to them. Number 2, speak up more. Say something. I remember very clearly what I was thinking before my first Instagram post about racism. It was this quote from Kamala Harris, and I remember thinking deeply about it because it was my first time ever saying Black Lives Matter, and I knew that if I said it publicly, then I need to truly mean it. And I do. The words that I say truly do mean something, and I can't stay silent anymore. Number 3, learn more. Just so you know, I'm going to recommend a bunch of resources, and you can find links to all these in the video's description below. I'm learning more by reading, watching movies, and listening to podcasts. I've read 3 books so far: White Fragility, Me and White Supremacy, and So You Want to Talk About Race. These are all great books to read. I got these book suggestions from a fellow middle school teacher, YouTuber, and her name's Megan. Be sure to check out her video as well. Before the school year begins this fall, I'm planning on reading some more books too. Stamped from the Beginning, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and For the White Folks Who Teach in the Hood. I've heard great things about these books. As for movies, I recommend watching 13th, Just Mercy, Selma, The Hate You Give, and I Am Not Your Negro. As for podcasts, I'm listening to Code Switch, the Good Ancestor podcast, and the Integrated Schools podcast. They're all so good. I'd love to talk more about them, but that's all I'm going to say. I could go on forever. Number 4, go to events. There are many different types of events out there. The 3 events that I've attended recently would all be considered marches because they all involved walking around with others and holding signs together. However, these 3 marches all had very different purposes from each other. The first event I went to was in central Portland, down closer to the river. We live out here in outer East Portland. There were a lot of people down there when we went down closer to the river. Everyone was peaceful down there, and it was more of a solidarity protest march for Black lives. The second event I went to was down in Salem at the state capitol. It was a more organized event with guest speakers, which focused on gathering white people together, educating them, and encouraging them to end white silence. Then we went on a quick protest march at the end. The third event I went to was in our neighborhood here in East Portland, organized by local churches to pray for our local neighbors and businesses. Our area of East Portland is where many marginalized communities of color reside, so we gathered to march and pray for our neighborhood. It was really awesome how many people honked their horns as they drove by, expressing their thanks as we marched. Number 5, start spending time with Black people. Exposure to people different than me is probably the biggest thing that helped me gain a new perspective. For me, it was spending time with my students and learning more about them in the classroom. I believe we learn best through community and getting to know each other. Number 6, parent your kids. I heard one Black woman say that white parents should work hard to raise the next generation by teaching their white kids more about Black history. For example, February should be filled with Black History Month activities to do as a white family. I thought that was a great suggestion. If you don't know what to say to your kids about racism, well, saying something is better than saying nothing. As a family, we have watched age-appropriate YouTube videos showing protests and what's been going on in the news. A couple good books for younger kids include The Skin You Live In and a kid's book about racism. We also just bought some new Barbies of different races. Here's a picture that my daughter wanted me to take for her. I've also been thinking about getting my kids more books with diverse characters. Last night I was reading a book about fairies to my girls, and I realized that none of the characters had dark skin color. They were all white. These are things that I never would have thought of before. It opens up dialogue with my kids when I intentionally buy them diverse books or toys. Number 7, vote for candidates who will make racial equity a priority. If it's not currently voting season, then reach out to your local representatives to tell them what changes that you'd like to see in your city. Number 8, support businesses of Black people, Indigenous people, or other people of color. There are many resources that you can find online when you search for these businesses. Instead of just sticking with what you're comfortable with, try to really research where your money is going and what or who it is supporting. Maybe find a local business rather than a corporate chain. Number 9, give money or volunteer time to organizations or movements that are already making a difference in marginalized neighborhoods. There are organizations that are already doing after-school mentoring and activities for kids. Support them with money. If you can't give money, then give your time and volunteer in Title I schools. These are often the schools that have predominantly students of color enrolled. And number 10, get involved in an interactive group of people that will hold you accountable. Learning in a group is so much deeper than learning on your own. Get a group together to do a book study and have honest conversations with other white people. I've discovered that there are already groups out there in my city already meeting, and I just needed to seek them out. If you're having trouble finding groups, then just start one yourself. I recommend checking out Latasha Morrison's curriculum from the Be the Bridge website for starting a group with other white people to work through together. I believe that systemic racism is a white people problem because white people have been in power as the dominant race. Because of that comfort, white people are ignorant and apathetic about it. The people with the power have to step into the shoes of the unheard. I want to end this video by showing you 2 excerpts from White Fragility that had the biggest impact on me. So take a look at this. In chapter 2, Robin DiAngelo lists people in power in the United States. So according to the numbers in 2016-2017, the 10 richest Americans were all 100% white. U.S. Congress was 90% white. U.S. governors 96% white. Top military advisors 100% white. The president and vice president were both white. U.S. House Freedom Caucus 99% white. Current U.S. presidential cabinet 91% white. People who decide which TV shows we see 93% white. People who decide which books we read 90% white. People who decide which news is covered 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. People who directed the 100 top grossing films of all time worldwide, 95% white. Teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's professional football teams, 97% white. These numbers are not describing minor organizations, nor are these institutions special interest groups. The groups listed above are the most powerful in the country. These numbers are not a matter of good people versus bad people. They represent power and control by a racial group that is in the position to disseminate and protect its own self-image, worldview, and interests across the entire society. So when I read this for the first time, I was shocked by this. No wonder our culture is so white-centered. And the second excerpt that I wanted to read has to do with baseball. And those of you who know me well know that I love baseball. Side note, my favorite baseball team is the Cleveland Indians, and I cringe now when I look back at pictures of me wearing Chief Wahoo. I'm really thankful that the Block C is the new logo. See, Block C. And I'm in full support of the Cleveland Indians changing their name too. But anyway, this excerpt is about Jackie Robinson. Oh, and on another side note, even though Jackie Robinson was the first black Major League Baseball player, he was in the National League with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Just 3 months after Jackie Robinson started playing with the Dodgers, the second black Major League Baseball player was Larry Doby, who played for the Cleveland. He was the first black player in the American League. Larry Doby was 7-time All-Star, Hall of Famer, and also a World Series champion with Cleveland way back in 1948, which just so happened to be the last time Cleveland won the World Series. So maybe my vote is to rename the team to the Cleveland Dobies. Wouldn't that be an awesome tribute and an honor to a great pioneer of the sport? I don't know. Just a thought. Anyway, back to Jackie Robinson. Let me read this to you. The story of Jackie Robinson is a classic example of how whiteness obscures racism by rendering whites, white privilege, and racist institutions invisible. Robinson is often celebrated as the first African American to break the color line and play in Major League Baseball. While Robinson was certainly an amazing baseball player, this storyline depicts him as racially special, a black man who broke the color line himself. The subtext is that Robinson finally had what it took to play with whites, as if no black athlete before him was strong enough to compete at that level. Imagine if instead the story went something like this. Jackie Robinson, the first black man whites allowed to play Major League Baseball. This version makes a critical distinction because no matter how fantastic a player Robinson was, he simply could not play in the major leagues if whites, who control the institution, did not allow it. Were he to walk on the field before being granted permission by white owners and policymakers, the police would have removed him. I think that that's really a more accurate way of looking at history. Understanding the dominant power that white people have had in this country and how that power needs to be more racially equitable. I believe those changes happen systemically as well as individually with authority figures in power. And this includes me as a white teacher of influence. I hope and pray that I will make a difference by continuing the work to be better. If you guys have any resources that you would recommend, please leave a comment below to share. I'd love to hear what you're learning too. Thanks for watching.